I got an interesting set of experience of creating a company, kind of exiting, changing your life up, figuring out a new role and a new way to live, and sort of reinventing your life.
This is the Agency Profit Podcast, the podcast for agency owners that want to run a more profitable business that doesn't depend on them. Introducing your host, CEO and co-founder of Parakeeto, Marcel Pettipaw.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I am joined today by a special guest who has built multi-million-dollar businesses. He's produced critically acclaimed documentaries, Emmy award-winning TV shows. He's invested millions of dollars in real estate, and he's semi-retired at age 43 after spending lots of time in the video and TV production space, running his own agency. And today he's sharing his lifetime of fiscal know-how, helping agencies and their owners plan for a more prosperous financial future. So with all of that, thank you for joining us today, Joe DiSanto.
Hey, absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me, Marcel.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you because you've got a really interesting background. Of course, you got into the creative services space. You built your own business. You've now exited that business. And we're able to kind of talk about that whole life cycle, the lessons learned, which I think is always a fun exercise, especially where you're not in the business anymore. So you can kind of, share a little bit more openly. And then I think what you're doing today is really interesting. So excited to jump in. But before we cover all that, I'd love to give you an opportunity in your own words to kind of talk a little bit about what you do and who you serve.
Yeah, well, these days, like you mentioned, my partners graciously cashed me out of our business a few years ago, and I mainly did that because I used to work a lot. The production, I actually owned a production and post-production company that serviced large, like multinational agencies. But I used to manage all the business stuff, marketing, branding, project management, sales, and also I managed all the finances from the very beginning. I used to actually do them myself, like QuickBooks, sit down after work and do that when we just started. And I just was always good at that. I'm into that. I'm into personal finance. I'm into investing. And so I wanted our company to be successful, obviously, but I also wanted to ensure that both myself and my partners were coming away with something after all that hard work. And so I really always delved into personal finance and making the most, keeping as much of the money you're making and then making the most of that money, pretty much by investing it in other things. And so now I am working as a part-time CFO, both for my old company and also for other creative service companies in Los Angeles and actually a couple in Austin, Texas now. Yeah, so I got an interesting set of experience of creating a company, kind of exiting, changing your life up, figuring out a new role and a new way to live, and sort of reinventing your life, all in a matter of 20 years.
Interesting. So, and I want to double click on this for a minute because it's something I found myself talking about a lot recently. I like that term, double click. I'm gonna use that. That's a good one. I've never heard that. I've been using it more and more. But this is an idea that I think I've been talking about a lot more recently, which is I think there's a lot of mud in the water in the industry about when we're quoting a job, should we be thinking about net profitability or gross profitability? And from my perspective, it's always more useful to think about what is the gross profit going to look like on this, because your net profit is just not that connected to a per project basis. That's kind of happening on its own in another place. So from my perspective, it's like, if you want to just be able to compare all your jobs across each other and make that calculation simple and useful historically, focus on gross and have your gross target be relative to what your overhead is generally going to look like. And so it sounds like in your case, you had, for the production company, you had a gross profit target, and that was relative to the overhead that you were carrying, and you were aware that it was lower because you tended to work with a lot more contractors and carry a smaller full-time staff. And then when you would subcontract the post-production company inside of that project, that had its own gross profit target, and that was also relative to how much overhead you were carrying there. So you were always thinking about it in terms of gross profit, but that target was adjusted based on overhead relative to the revenue for that business. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you obviously are worried about both because, as you mentioned in your opening, owning a business is great, but what is the point of owning a business if you don't actually net any money at the end of the year, you know? So what I do now, like, is I'm helping my clients just manage their company's money, but I'm educating them, and it's I'm always surprised. I'm sort of never surprised now, but I was just surprised how people do worry about their business finances to some degree, not even to the degree I think they should in that sense, but they're not worried about their personal finances much at all. And I'm like, well, but they are the same. Like, I mean, like, it's not like you're a stockholder in like a huge company. It's like you are the one of like 3 owners here. All the net really becomes your money, and it's like, you need to make sure, you know, it's like money enters your life at the company, but it really only becomes real like when you're filing your tax return and you're like realizing, okay, I actually made this much money for myself. It's in my bank account. And that's what I'm going to use to save and plan for my retirement. So I'm really trying to being an evangelist to my clients to be like, we got to look at your whole life financial picture, not just your business. It's like your business is where the money comes in, but like your savings account is really the true net result. And then you have to treat your personal life, I think, your personal finances like a business, you know, just like any business. You got income and expense in your personal finances, you know, obviously the expenses are your kid's school or whatever, but it's like that needs to be profitable as well, you know, and the true net of that is that's going to be your nest egg for potentially stopping working someday if that's in your plan, you know.
Well, and I want to delve into that because I think you're absolutely right. As entrepreneurs, we tend to put most of our risk in our life into our business. And a lot of times we're not even necessarily clear on what exactly that means for things like retirement and things like, you know, long-term financial planning. What are some of the big things that entrepreneurs should be thinking about, especially, you know, if they're owning a creative services business, when it comes to holistically planning for their own financial success? Whether that be how to be efficient about pulling money out of the business, how to think about building value into the company versus taking cash out and investing it personally. What are some of the things that you see often, and some of the things that our listeners should be thinking about in that context?
Sure. Well, I'm going to double back a little bit in that, you know, kind of looking at it like as this whole thing is, first I focus on the business is like, okay, the per project costs, and trying to figure out, you know, the profile of the business that we do, and look at the, you know, I would always calculate just on a project basis the cost of things, and then I would figure out which clients of ours, like what jobs are those coming and do the best, which do the worst, and then you start to figure out over time, like, well, which clients maybe do I want to get rid of, you know, or which ones do I want to nurture, and after that you have your, you know, you're working down your net profit, so you got your overhead, and you're always trying to balance. Like for me, is like, if it was a freelancer that was specifically only there for the job, that's a job cost, you know. But obviously, much of our staff is working on these projects, but they're kind of available to do other projects too. They're crisscrossing. So I was kind of drew the line there. I'm like, if they're only here for this project, they're a hard cost. If they're staff, obviously they're in the overhead. But one of the main things you're always looking for is freelancers versus full time, and when to make that transition. And it's like, so you generally get your hard costs down by mostly removing freelancers and putting them in the staff category, but obviously then the staff overhead grows. But generally I find if you can kind of get to a certain threshold of needing a particular person, you know, maybe to the point of 50%, then you kind of switch them to freelance to full-time if you can get a quality person, because then you can drop some more of that, you know, lower margin stuff on them in their free time, and you can build them and they're there, and you can have more like just a good net, you know, safety net for whatever's going to happen with any given client. But I mentioned staff because it is one of the biggest expenses, you know, overall of running a business with people. You know, nowadays it's like, I am envious of some of these, you know, scalable like software as a service companies. You just throw in another customer and it's like almost, you know, there's nothing to it, because just keep selling the thing. I mean, you know, it sits there on a computer. It's amazing. You know, in service,
it's not quite that simple, but
I know,
it is a lot hard. You know, it is a lot easier than hiring people.
You can just, you know, you're welcoming piling on new customers for the service as much as you can. With the service business, like you're like, okay, I need like an actual person to do that now. I know I oversimplified. I'm trying to get into the digital services game. It's so exciting. I call it. Well, I won't get into that. But anyway, then after all your overhead and everything, it's like, okay, what's our net profit going to be? That's my life. That's what I earn for all my hard work. And I was always, with my partners and it's like, I feel like you got to take the money out. You know what I mean? You have to, as an owner, you do get stressed. You do get burnt out. It's like you need that reward, I really think, especially after some time. In the beginning, you're just like so pumped. But after a few years of stress and anxiety and all that, you're just like, you need that reward. You need to see it happening. You need to see the money coming into your bank account, I think. Now, truth be told, that's not to say that it might not have to come back out of your bank account, and go back into the company. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it is needed, you are the person that's going to do that, or it's going to be from credit, So I kind of had my little thresholds. It's like I built a system where I knew what my sort of my rough cost in a job should be, so I knew what my basic revenue targets should be. I knew if I met those targets, it was going to net down to this for me. And if I could generally, I set up a system where I could just easily look at my numbers and my revenue on a gross basis and know that it was going to cascade into what my plan, what my net result for myself was going to be. And then I usually would only leave a couple months, buffer, like cash flow buffer, in our accounts before we would take the money out for ourselves. I mean, actually in tax reality as an S corp, it's like it's a pass-through entity. It's like it all becomes taxable dollars for you at the end of the year, whether you take it out of the company bank account or not. So I'm like, if I'm going to pay taxes on it, I'm definitely going to take it out of the bank account. And you work your way towards not funding the shortages with your pay. You build up your credit line, you build up your credit, you manage cash flow issues that way, and you get the business to be in its own just self-sufficient realm. And then I always say, to some of my clients who are younger and nervous, they're responsible in that they don't want to drain the company account, you know what I mean, and then not have enough money there. I'm like, well, if the business isn't such that you can take the money out, and feel comfortable and not regularly have to put it back in, I mean, then you have to worry about if that's a good business to be in, Generally, most of my clients' cases, it is, but and they're trying to be responsible. But I do encourage them. I'm like, take the reward. It's it is what keeps you going in a large way.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I want to take a moment to thank you for being a loyal listener of the show. If you're enjoying today's episode, then I want to encourage you to subscribe so you never miss another episode, and be sure to check out some of the other amazing free resources we have at Parakeeto.com to help you improve your agency's profitability. We have lots of other content just like this episode, including other detailed blog posts on some of the key topics, and free downloadable resources like the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which has helped hundreds of agencies improve their profitability with checklists, templates, and free training videos to help you install the Agency Profitability Flywheel all on your own. So if you're interested in grabbing that, head over to Parakeeto.com and check the show notes as well. So with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I'll let you get back to the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Yeah. So I like the way that you describe that, and there's a couple of things that I want to really reinforce and also provide some resources to our listeners on, because we've covered a lot of these different topics that I think cascade nicely into what you've just summarized here. So the first thing that you said that I think is critically important is start with focusing on the gross profitability of your work. I think we both agreed, like, if that's not there, everything else is going to be harder, and I think we see this all the time when clients come to us and they're super focused on the net profit number. And we're like, okay, your problem isn't that you're spending, an extra $200 a month on a bookkeeper when you could be spending a little bit less. It's that your work's not profitable. You're not scoping it right. You're not charging enough. Like, there's something in the operational model. You feel like you're suffering from indigestion, or from starvation, but you're actually experiencing indigestion. So let's fix that first. Then you can manage to the net profit number. And again, if the work is profitable to begin with, that should, to a large extent, take care of itself, as long as you're not overspending on things and being ridiculous. And then the last piece here is, do you pull the money out or reinvest it in? And I like the way you frame that, you know, and looking at it in terms of a question of risk, and thinking about like, is there an opportunity to reinvest this money to keep up with demand? In which case the risk is, you know, if you know your gross profit's good and if you know you're managing to like good net margins, then you can pretty much forecast, if we put this, you know, a couple $100,000 in to staff up, then we should get this much in return. And then balance that against, can I get credit for that? And then also invest this money elsewhere and get double returns. You know, is the risk higher in the business than outside of the business? So really kind of thinking of that in a holistic way, I think is a powerful exercise. But the ability to do that with confidence comes from good fundamentals in the business, profitable work, you know, good financial management, visibility into your overhead, how that relates to your gross profit, so that you actually can make an informed decision about, if I put $1 back into the business, what can I realistically expect to get back out? And then related to this, a couple of things that you mentioned that I want to touch on. There's an episode on the show here with Chris Hervishon where he talks about how to think about how much cash should be in the business based on things like, are we planning on purchasing a building? Is there a partner leaving soon? How fast are we growing, right? So how much cash should you leave in to plan for those things? Michelle Seiler-Tucker was just on the show talking about how to think about the valuation of your business. So some considerations there, right? Is it worth pumping some money back in to change your growth rate by a little bit? Is that going to have a material impact on your exit? Well, if you have an exit plan, then you can actually make an informed decision about that. So these things, like, they all cascade together to make that question of, what do I do with this money, probably a lot easier to answer if your ducks are in a row on those things kind of beforehand.
Yeah, that was a great summary, by the way. Really good. You really,
I try to listen.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like I was touching on a little bit, is like the numbers. I like to do the math on stuff, and you know, you'd be surprised how generally consistent a lot of the math looks over time. You know, and you know your business well, you know the customer. You know, a lot of times the pricing is you know, sort of consistent in the industry. There's always younger people willing to pay, you know, charge less because they're new, like you were at one point. And there's other factors, but you really can look at, you know, your kind of averages, and you can have a pretty simple, at least for our size business, you know, you can have a pretty simple idea of like, if I bill this amount of money every month, this is roughly what is going to happen by the end of the month, you know? And when you're looking at that, and I would always every year kind of reverse engineer that. I'd look at all our numbers. I look at the percentages. I see if they were in line with expectation. I see if maybe we're doing better because we made some shifts in staffing or whatever, or maybe we got a new client that they were fresh to us. We got started with them charging a little bit more. You're always trying to charge more and sort of train, you know, get into a new client with higher margins and train the old ones up, you know, because you grow and you're in service businesses, you start being, you know, trying to charge less and you work your way up. And, but you could say, listen, every month, this is what I need to make, and that's gonna cover my basic scenario. And then if I'm making more than that every month, if every month I look at it and I make an extra $50,000 or $100,000 a month more than my target, well, that's going to be my surplus. That's going to build up over time. And every month, I mean, in a spreadsheet, I look at our billings and I'd have just a simple average, you know, and I say, okay, our average for this year has been $50,000 over our target. So in 6 months, that means I have $300,000 of surplus that I can count on to do whatever I need to do. If I need to staff up and I want to, that's where you might invest some extra money initially. If I want to take some money out for the partners, reward them. If it comes to gear and infrastructure, you can always finance that. You can finance gear and infrastructure really easily through equipment leases. And once your company's old enough, like I can literally finance $200,000 with a few phone calls, no personal guarantee. You know, I mean, if you have a good payment history with a group of leasers or equipment leasers, equipment's easy. And, you know, you don't go out and generally expand your space, you know, on short notice. You know, you go into a new space, you go with some capacity, you know how many more rooms or desks you can build out. You know where that's going to go. Eventually, you'll run out of space and you got to do a reset. But that's going to, you know, I mean, if you're growing like huge, like, I don't know, you have to do that more quickly. In our case, it was pretty steady. So you can see what that surplus is going to be, you know. And because we were, you know, we had terms net 60 basically, it's like I saw our billings, and by the time we get paid, like it's like I knew what the surplus was, and then it starts to come in a few months later. So it just starts to play out pretty basically as you saw it, and so you can plan ahead 3 months. Like, this is what we're going to be doing. This is what I want to do. Bonuses for the owners, we would kind of know they were coming a few months in advance, because we knew that money was going to show up. So it doesn't take that much planning for a business even of that size, and that's the size of business I help. That's what I, ran. And when I don't help multinational conglomerate publicly traded companies, I'm not that guy, but yeah, it doesn't take a lot of planning, but it's like a lot of people just don't do it, or they mainly because they don't have the time, business owners are busy. And if you don't have a financially minded partner, like if you don't have that kind of finance partner, a CFO partner or whatever, that's where I find that companies really struggle, because the two owners are like creatives, they don't want to do that and they don't even know how, but they don't really have someone, like you can't just have a bookkeeper do that, So it's a hard thing to solve, that piece. And ironically for me, not unexpectedly, I just happened to become available to some friends' companies, and they're like, "Wow, you're doing that now? Will you do that for us? We really need someone to look at our numbers and tell us if this business is worth being in."
Well, Joe, we have delved into lots of fantastically nerdy things today. I think there's lots of insights from what you've shared today that I'm sure our listeners will take away. But for those that want to follow more of your work and what you're doing and reach out to you, where can they find you online and follow you?
Yeah, my website is playlouder.com. My motto is work smarter, plan better, play louder. And, I do consulting work. That's my primary thing, but my Play Louder is kind of my blog, where I pretty much give away as much of this information, to individuals and small business owners and whoever, for free. And I have some courses there as well, both free and paid. And so that's where I'm at. And if I'm not doing my consulting work, I'm throwing up more content on my blog.
Well, there you have it, folks. It'll be in the show notes if you want to go check out what Joe's doing over at Play Louder. Definitely go down there and check that out. And with that, Joe, I want to thank you for making some time for us today and being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right. And with that, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Let us know in the comments, wherever you're listening to this, what you took away from the episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Well, that's all for today's episode, but it doesn't have to be the end of your learning journey. Make sure you subscribe to our show so you never miss another episode. And if you want to get access to more great resources, be sure to check out Parakeeto.com, where we've got tons of other free resources, including the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which is loaded with templates, checklists, and training videos to help you improve your agency's profitability fast. And of course, if you like the show, it would really help us out if you could leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might get value, so you can help us serve more people. So with that, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.